We are talking to Conor O'Neill from the Rivals.com network. He is in charge, the publisher of Deacons Illustrated and Duke Illustrated. Kind of a unique position. So, if people saw our Wake Forest podcast, they'll know Connor definitely knows the stuff about Duke coming up. So, Duke at NC State, 3:30 p.m. Saturday. This is JC Zumbo of the NC State rival site, the Wolfpack Central. Carter Finley Stadium. State one win away from bowl eligibility. Senior day. It's really weird to have senior day this early in November, but that's how it broke this year. But it's always interesting. I've heard Dave Doran talk about losses for 12 years off and on, right? I truly think that Duke lost last year still hits him harder than any of his other losses he's had over the years. And, I think there are some remnants of that Duke team and some remnants of that NC State team. So it's going to be a different game on Saturday. But who are some of the players that were factors last year that carried over to this year?
Well, obviously, State has one of them with Jordan Waters.
Hmm.
A little bit weird to have your senior day with your new team against the old team that you left. Um, Trying to think, the long touchdown in the game last year was by Jalen Calhoun, if I remember correctly. So he's
Yep.
out of there. But Duke's best receiver last year was quietly Jordan Moore, and he's back. Um, he was great in the first few games of the year. He got hurt with a shoulder injury against UConn in the third game pretty late, and he really wasn't himself for the 3 or 4 games after that. And he's gotten back up to speed, so kind of bad news for NC State there. He had this crazy one-handed catch over the middle for a big third down conversion at Miami. In the first half, he had a sideline catch that, when you're watching it live, you thought there was no way he stayed in bounds, but he was able to catch it when he was pretty much like 90 degrees with the ground. The running backs will be completely new. Star Thomas is a transfer from New Mexico State, and Peyton Jones, Duke, NC State didn't really see him last year. He was a freshman, but he's really come on strong. He had 132 offensive yards last week at Miami, kind of his breakout performance. Um, Quarterbacks new. The defensive line is basically an overhaul, other than the defensive ends, I guess. Vincent Anthony Jr. and Wesley Williams were both prominent players last year. They've both taken a step forward this year as third year guys, and the new scheme has really helped them out in their development too. Like the defensive ends for Manny and the way he schemes up defense, they get vertical in a hurry and create a bunch of sacks and havoc and TFLs and everything that defensive ends love to do. So there are notes of last year's Duke team in this year's one, but there's also quite a few guys that are different, some positions that were kind of complete overhauls. So it's kind of a mixture of new and old for this team.
I guess there's a lot of different ways I could start, but usually it always starts with the quarterback. So Malik Murphy went to Texas. He was able to, I believe, get two starts in when Quinn
Yep.
Ewers was injured a year ago. He enters the transfer portal prior to Texas even playing in the playoffs. Unique situation, but that's college football in 2023, 2024. Comes to Duke. He is one of the larger quarterbacks. I don't know if this is dating myself, but I would say a Dante Culpepper type of build. A very big, strong guy. And
I,
I watch him, and he can make all the throws, but he also seems to have about three to four throws where you just kind of wonder, will they get intercepted or what will happen? Is that, I don't know if I would call it unevenness, but is that pretty much what I've seen the last few times I've seen him? Has that kind of been the gist this year?
yeah, it's just basically been inconsistencies. And he'd been getting away with all but one of those throws until the Miami game. Like he'd only ever had one interception in a game. I think he had one each in the first 5 games of the year, which was weird because Duke was 5-0. Um, then it unraveled a little bit in Miami, and he threw 3 of them. Also got strip sacked, so he had 4 turnovers down there. The first interception was awful and set up Miami's second touchdown and put Duke down 14-0. The other 2 interceptions, while they were bad plays, they were also him trying to force the issue when Duke was down and trying to move Duke down the field quickly when they were behind in the second half and had blown a 11-point lead. So there's a little bit it's not forgiveness, but it's understanding of where he made those turnovers. And then the turnover late was another, you know, you're either holding on to the ball too long or protection broke down. I don't remember what the specific one was there, but yeah, I mean, I'm a little younger than you, so I go to Byron Leftwich.
Sure.
I go to a guy that is big and loves to stand in the pocket and deliver accurate throws, but there's not much else that he can do. Only in these last 2 games has Duke really rolled him or moved him out of the pocket. We've seen him buy a little bit more time for himself by scrambling, but he does not scramble to run. I mean, he had one scramble to run against Carol. I think it was no, it was SMU, I believe it was. It was either SMU or Florida State, where he got out and ran, and he's just not fleet of foot.
Sure.
It's kind of a brain twister in this state because everybody wants him to be Cam Newton because he's that size and he's big and athletic, but it's just not him. And so it's been interesting watching him. Um, like you said, all the arm talent in the world. I mean, arm talent for days. And when he's on, Duke's offense hums. And you think that if they put that together for 4 quarters, they could be scoring at a level that would give them a chance, not just give them a chance. They if they'd been able to score for 4 quarters the way they did in certain spots, they'd have a win over one of the 2 teams that we're now looking at as they're on a collision course to Charlotte right now with SMU and Miami in the last 2 weeks. But it's just not been consistent.
You mentioned Payne Jones, who I think is really starting to come on. And then the other player, he might have gotten shaken up late in the Miami game. I'm not positive. But Clark Hagens was the other one,
Samir.
or Samir Hagens, I mean. I think Hagens and Jones are 2 guys that are clearly building blocks for the future and make plays. How much have they kind of helped out, take some of the load off of the returning players?
Well, I'll start with Hagens because I really thought that his game against Miami was going to come last year, and it never did. He had a great final month, 5 or 6 games to end 2022. It was right around the time that Eli Pankel got hurt at the end of that season, and it was kind of like, man, this is at the time he was a redshirt freshman that had come on strong, and it was like, man, he's really going to be something else in the following season. And last year, Duke's passing game just wasn't there for a litany of reasons. I mean, one of them was how well they ran the ball. I mean, when you're running the ball for 180 to 200 yards, you don't really need to throw the ball for 300. Um, that was just the way they played. But Samir, it's better. It's like a better late than never game for him at Miami. He's a 4th year guy, so it's not really like he's young. I kind of see it as he already had his young breakout games, and that was 2 years ago. And now, we got good reports, of course, after the fact that he was practicing with his hair on fire last week. So we'll kind of see with him. Like I'm cautiously optimistic that there's more of that to come from him, but I'm also there's a little skepticism because he had all of last season to make plays like that, and he had drops. He was inconsistent. He couldn't stay on the field for very long. Just it didn't happen for him. With
Sure.
with Peyton Jones. I mean, we got to see a couple we get to see a couple spring practices with Duke, and uh, a year and a half ago, before that guy even played a game for Duke, I looked at him in a spring practice and was just like, man, that guy has a little bit extra juice, a little extra burst. Like that's that's what an ACC football running back should be. And
Sure.
he didn't really get much of a chance last year because they stayed pretty healthy at running back, and he was number four. And you're always only going to either play two or three of them, and it's a stretch to get that third one in there. But they've lost Jaquez Moore. I mean, they haven't put him on the shelf this year, but Jaquez Moore entered the year as a starter. He got hurt really early in the second game at Northwestern, and he came back for one snap against Carolina and suffered another injury, and we haven't seen him since.
Can
So
he redshirt? Does he have a redshirt year to use?
he has that in his back pocket, and I get the sense that that's what Duke wants to do because Star Thomas is in his last year of eligibility. They don't have that much depth at the position. Like I've been going through about the last month and a half thinking if they lose Star Thomas or Peyton Jones, they're going to be in a little bit dire straits with what they have behind those guys. So they've been lucky and they haven't lost them. But I think now they want to get it to where Jaquez redshirts this year and comes back next year, and they have him and Peyton Jones as their 1-2. I think that would be pretty strong to put in a backfield together.
Sure. Now, to people hearing this might sound odd. I watched Cam Ward throw for 400 yards and five touchdowns and show why he is a Heisman Trophy contender. And yet, I also believe Duke has a really good secondary. Can
Yeah,
two things be true at the same time?
yeah. They do have a good secondary. They missed. I don't know if PFF updated. I always am a little tepid about fully trusting PFF's grades, but PFF had Duke missing 18 tackles against Miami, and that's not been them all year. I think in the two games prior, Florida State and SMU, they combined to miss 20 in those games. It was, you're caught between a rock and a hard place when you're trying to explain it was an aberration for Duke's defense, but also they haven't played skill like Miami has at receiver and running back
The
at all this
Restrepo
season.
one where two guys nearly collided and both missed them was not a great look. And I'm
No,
sure that did not go over well in the film room with the coaches and the players.
no,
But
it didn't. And
Stinson is one of those guys who's back from last year, entered the portal, came back. Rivers, or is it Rivers or Rivens?
Rivers,
Rivers,
he's
solid
been
at corner.
phenomenal.
Yeah. Like these are guys that make want to make plays. And yet, Cam Ward, 400 yards, five touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I mean, you got to review the film and say what went wrong. But at other points, I feel like you're just looking at it like that's a throw that an NFL quarterback makes, and some NFL throws beat college DBs. I mean, that just happens every Saturday, and hell, most days of the week now that we got Maction and Sunbelt fun on Wednesday and Thursday, like every week, every day, pretty much. But yeah, I mean, it's a decent secondary. Terry Moore has taken a step forward as a converted running back. Last year he was new to the position. Now he's fully immersed at safety. They've got young DBs too, like Kamari Robinson plays a lot of snaps at corner, and he's able to give them a little bit of flexibility with moving Chandler Rivers to the nickel at times. And Deshaun Stone, I think you had eyes on him early in Asheville in his prep career. He hits hard. Like you get
Yeah.
hit by him, and he makes you not want to get hit by him again. And I always think that's a little undervalued when we evaluate football guys. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
didn't. If
they've
I
got
saw
guys.
Deshaun Stone play, maybe it was the Shrine Bowl, but where I did see him for sure was on the basketball court.
Okay.
He played for AC Reynolds in Nashville, and he was a teammate of Marquise Passmore, who finished up at Combine Academy and is now a freshman at Kansas.
Yep.
So, when Stone kind of emerged as a football prospect, I remember watching his huddle film, and I think the big question was would he have the quickness or the explosion to get to where he needed to go? Because he was a ball hawk.
Hmm.
He obviously good size, good hands. So that was kind of like the book on him coming out of Asheville Reynolds. There's a handful of guys that are overlap between Duke and NC State in football recruiting. Not as many as people probably think. I know NC State offered VJ Anthony, Pride of Durham, Bull City guy, Jordan High School.
Yep.
Um, but he was that guy that I ended up getting I want to say, I don't know if it was a late invite to the Army All-American Bowl, but or Under Armour, one of the All-Star games. He was able to play in. I know he impressed Rivals.com people. Being a local guy, watched him at Duke, freshman year, sophomore year, and it just seems like he's getting better and better and better each year.
He had to bulk up. Like he was starting games in the ACC that first season in 2022. I don't remember what they listed him at. I think they listed him at 240. It looked more like he was 220, and 220 on a 6'6" frame. It's really hard to play defensive end in college football. And a couple things have helped. I mean, the bulking up and getting stronger has helped, and that's going to happen over the course of time with every college football player. But the scheme change helped him out too. And I think this staff has a little more confidence in him. They're able to, confidence is a two-way street. The staff has more confidence in the player, so the player goes out there and knows he's not going to get taken off the field if he misses an assignment during in the middle of a drive. And so he's got confidence to make plays and play a little freer. And I think that's also what we've seen from him. I think he's maybe already doubled up his career sack total this season. I think he had 2.5 in the first 2 years of his career, and he was last I looked, which was a couple weeks ago. He was already at 4.5 or 5. So he is thriving under the new staff in the new scheme, and he really looks like he has kind of capitalized on what people saw from him back in that Under Armour game, like what almost 3 years ago now.
Yeah. And then I don't know when it was when I watched Wesley Williams as a freshman play defensive end, but I was like, "Ooh, okay
Yeah.
now." Like he looked the part, and he was explosive, and he was long. And I looked up his rivals profile. Clearly, a little under recruited, come out of his high school in Virginia. But that's kind of been the difference. I think Duke over the last 3, 4 years is D line.
Yeah.
And when you get guys like Anthony and Wesley Williams, and before that, Peebles and Carter, and I believe there was a third, the one that transferred in that was humongous.
Jamion Franklin.
Yeah, big dude. What, Notre Dame?
Yep.
Yeah, big guy. So, Duke didn't have that, 4 or 5 years ago, I don't feel like.
No.
But yeah, Williams is another havoc guy, and they clearly get after the rush, the quarterback.
Yeah, Williams is the one that I've been fascinated by him this year because he's kind of the opposite of EJ for the first 4 to 6 games of the year. I did not think the new scheme and staff fit him, and his production and his pressure rate was down, like his grades were down. He has gotten more comfortable in the second half though. Like he is putting up better numbers as the season has gone on. So it reads to me, without confirming having talked to him or anything, it reads to me like he's a guy that it took him a couple games of playing in the system to really understand what was required of him, what he could do, what his freedoms were within the defense. And now that he has a better understanding of that, yeah, I mean, he looks, if not as good as he did last year, he looks better than he did last year. And last year was really his breakout season. I mean, he played some big time snaps. He was credited with both field goal blocks against Clemson in the opener when they had the big win. So he's yeah, their defensive line, the way they've kind of reloaded with the two ends that came back, and then Aaron Hall. I mean, they lost their top three defensive tackles, and I did not know how they were going to replace those guys because Dwayne Carter, Aeneas Peebles, Jamion Franklin. I mean, those were three guys that could have played for every ACC team last season. And they've gotten a guy in Aaron Hall that was seldom used over the last 2 or 3 years. He's come in there, and if I had to file an all ACC team right now, I think he'd be. I don't know if he'd be a first team defensive tackle, but he'd be in there. Like he'd be a second or third team all ACC defensive tackle. He's been that strong, that consistent, and that stout, both getting pressure up the middle and against the run.
Sure. Special teams wise,
Oh
inconsistent.
boy.
Is that the word, or how are we going to describe the special teams right now?
I mean, they seem. I just wrote it. I can't even remember where I wrote it, but I just wrote it that they seem to find a new way to make you rub your temples and pull your hair out, and they do some things on special teams that cause some stress among fans, players, staff, everybody involved with watching. Myself, I mean,
Hmm.
they're a rough watch on special teams sometimes. I mean, they had the one against Miami, you could kind of understand where they were coming from. They had a squib kick that got returned to midfield after they kicked a field goal to make it a 32-31 game. They're trying to steal a possession. And they saw something in Miami's kick return game that if they kicked it to a certain spot, I I if I'm interpreting what Manny has told us correctly, they thought they could steal a possession there. So they thought, okay, we kicked a field goal when we're down four. Now we're only down one. If we give the ball back to Miami's offense, they're just going to march down the field again. Like they're really hard to stop when they get rolling, and they were rolling in the second half. So they wanted to break up the momentum. They wanted to steal a possession. They just had poor execution on it, and it gets returned to midfield. And two snaps later, Miami's scoring a touchdown, and it's an 8 point game, and
Sure.
and all the momentum is on their side. So that backfired. I mean, they missed three kicks against SMU. They were all different issues. Like the PAT was either a bad snap or a bad hold. Kicker just missed a 42-yarder that he pulled left. And then a freak athlete defensive end just hopped the line and blocked the one that would have won the game on the last play of regulation, the 30-yard chip shot that was pretty much the exact distance and direction that Todd Polino made against Wake Forest last year on the last play of the game to beat Wake. So
Sure.
I mean, you feel for them on some level because Duke is under Cutcliffe. Like that was special teams. They had to make up margins. And right now you look at where they are and where they would be if they had special teams that put them in advantageous positions instead of disadvantage them in certain spots. You're like, well, they'd at least be 7-2, maybe 8-1, and they'd be right in the thick of trying to get to Charlotte in about a month.
Sure. Now, here's a story idea for you. As I just think about this in the last couple of minutes. You know, Obviously, a lot of people make a big deal of John Shire being part of Mike Krzyzewski's coaching tree. But is there a school in the country that probably has more combined wins ever in the history of the game, history of college sports, between Bobby Bowden and Mike Krzyzewski? And here's Duke having Manny Diaz and John Shire. And obviously, in between Bobby Bowden, it was Chuck Amato being a mentor with Manny Diaz.
Yep.
Is there any times where he does some echoes of a Chuck Amato or a Bobby Bowden when he talks with the media? Does he do what Mark Goffrey did at NC State, where there was a lot of UCLA Jim Herrick here and there?
Um, the one that comes to mind, and it was recent, was he was talking about Eli Pankel being a senior receiver and how dependable he's been as a 60-year guy. And he said something about Coach Bowden used to say, seniors don't let us lose. Like seniors just go out there and hold everybody accountable, make the plays that need to be made, strive and stress that extra half second or whatever on a block. And so he echoed Bobby Bowden with seniors don't let us lose. Um, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. I don't know that I've heard him say anything about Chuck Amato other than when it's been brought up this week that he spent time at NC State. I think it was what, 6 years.
It had a good
Um,
spin. I trusted you could bring out some Chuck Amato in him.
I think I probably I think I probably could. Um, it's the craziest part of this season for Duke is, the schedule is obviously put together so far in advance that it's not like they're designing a schedule for Manny Diaz, but they hire Manny Diaz and then you look at you start running down the list. Like They played Middle Tennessee, where he was a that's the first place he was a defensive coordinator. They played Carolina. Mac Brown fired him in the middle of a season at Texas. They played Florida State, his alma mater, where he was his first job in college football was as an analyst.
Hmm.
They play SMU, which has his offensive coordinator from Miami is Rhett Lashley, who's now SMU's head coach. They play Miami, where he was the only other place he's been a head coach. Now they play NC State, the first place that he had a on-field coaching role. So
So you're
it's
basically saying that Penn State and Duke are destined to be in a bowl game somehow, some way.
I don't know how that happens. I'm sure I guess Penn State has to blow a lot of games here in the last month. Um, is is the Charlotte Bowl still a Big Ten tie or is that an SEC tie now?
I don't know. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, you're looking at his resume and it's not like he's bounced around place after place every year. Like he was at NC State for 6 years.
Yeah.
He was at Miami for six, three as a coordinator and three as the head coach. So you kind of run out of places to name that Duke could play that have more of a tie-in than the ones that are already on Duke's schedule this year.
You alluded to already playing SMU in Miami and that they could face each other in the ACC title game, which is different. And then, but if they were to play each other, who do you have and by how much?
Well, I would take the over first of all because I'm not impressed by either one of those teams' defenses. Um, it's hard to shake the visual of how gross SMU's offense was with ball security. And they turned the ball over six times, and they fumbled more times than they
They were sharp though
recovered.
against Pittsburgh.
What's that?
They were sharp against Pittsburgh on Saturday.
Oh, okay. I I
Yeah.
I didn't see that. Yeah,
It was over at halftime.
I
It was
did see a little bit of that. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was over at
Yeah.
halftime. I'm sure many people switched over to Louisville and Clemson.
Yeah, and that wasn't much of a game either. Um, no, I would take Miami. I don't know how you stop Miami for a full game. Like Duke
Mhm.
was celebrating the fact that they forced a few three and outs in the first half because I think Miami has, if not, if it's not the lowest, it's one of the lowest three and out rates in the country. I think they had two or three and outs in the first half. I don't know how Miami doesn't score a ton of points on whoever they play for the rest of the ACC schedule.
Sure. And I'll leave you on this one. Switch a little bit to basketball. So our friend Joe Giglio is oop, uh, little technical issue. Our friend Joe Giglio is, but we'll say he's predicted that Duke will win the national title in basketball. What has to happen for Duke to have that kind of year?
Whew. Um, just one thing.
No, just a couple. I mean, what are you kind of seeing between exhibition game, season opener, where it's like, okay, if they improve on this or they keep doing that, but this is the formula.
I mean, I know it was Maine in the season opener, but if they get the same type of stuff out of the two freshmen forward slash wings with Con Knipple going for 22 points, and it was a really easy 22, and Cooper Flag putting up what I think will be a typical line for him, what we've talked about, the 18 points, efficient shooting. He had some threes that rolled in and out. It could have been a 24 or 25 point game for him. Uh, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. I think he had two or three steals. If they get that type of stuff from those two consistently throughout the year, they've got the rest of the pieces to do it. I guess that kind of leads me into they have to get steady, good guard play from the two returners. Like Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor have to be, you're asking a little more of them than you should be because Proctor's a junior and Foster's a sophomore. You're asking them to kind of be your senior guards. Um, but they'll have to be the steadying hands. I look at them and they fill in so many holes that John's first two teams had. And the first two teams that John had won an ACC tournament and went to the Elite Eight. So when you're looking at that as you can accomplish those things when you have teams with some pretty glaring flaws and holes. And I look at this team and where they can kind of fill in where those flaws and holes used to be. It's it's a team that looks like they're going to be right there at the end of the season.
Sure. I'd have to check the stats again. For some reason, my memory is 2 years ago, I didn't think Duke had enough three-point shooters. Last year, I didn't think they
No,
had enough size.
they
And
were a terrible shooting team 2 years ago.
yeah, and I think this year they have the size and enough three. I wouldn't call them a great three-point shooting team, but enough.
Yeah,
Call them enough three-point shooting team, especially if Kanapo is really making them. And Zion James, I think, will be a real key guy as the season goes along. Where can people see your work? This, as we said earlier in the podcast, is Conor O'Neill, Devils Illustrated, Rivals.com network. Where can people see your work this week?
yeah. Devils Illustrated is duke.rivals.com. Got two things up there already this morning. This will be linked up on there. We'll have coverage rolling. Got basketball game on Friday night. I know that NC State fans aren't too concerned with that one, but we'll have good stuff pumping throughout the week.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I think one of the neat things about the Triangle though is that state fans watch Duke, they watch UNC, vice versa. You
Yeah.
know, it's always amazing to me how many people on our message boards or various entities that, it feels like they know every player on all the other teams too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, State has Presbyterian. Basically, State is going to play a murderer's row of teams in the 300s on the net until they face Purdue on November 28th. And then Wolfpack Nation will really see what kind of team they have this year, which is pretty much a brand new team. But they look way more athletic than last year's team. It was, they stubbed their toe against Lee's McRae and kind of played with their food a little bit. Next thing you know, it was tied 69-69. But they took care of business against US South Carolina Upstate,
Yeah.
and it was pretty much over at halftime. And that was just the difference between those two games. But this is JC Zumble talking to Conor O'Neill again, 3:30 on Saturday, ACC Network. As Dave Doran said, the best of both worlds, where they could have a lot of tailgating time and they can have their fancy light show if it gets dark enough in the fourth quarter.
Be
So
home by midnight.
true, true. So it'll be good. I haven't made my prediction yet. I think it's going to be competitive. I don't. I truly think it could be a one score game or one touchdown game, 6 points or less. Which probably falls right in line with what Vegas is saying. But it'll be interesting to see if how much of that Stanford effect will rub off for the next game because Duke's defense is a little tougher than Stanford's
Yeah.
defense, and Duke's offense is much, much better than Stanford's offense. So that part's going to be interesting. But like I said, I think it will really come down to interceptions at either team. Doran always likes to play, talk about turnover margin, but because Murphy will throw some passes that are gettable,
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But thank you for taking time. And again, this is JC Zumble, NC State Rivals, the Wolfpack Central. Find us on Instagram and Twitter and Threads and YouTube. And next YouTube project will be East Forsyth, West Forsyth from Friday Night in Football, which is in Connor's neck of the woods. And having some fun with a lot of different things on Instagram.